Every evening as the lights dimmed in the glass meeting rooms of Delridge Systems and the sound of keyboards faded into silence, a quiet figure began her shift. Her name was Marcia Lewis, 55 years old, a black woman with a small frame and steady hands, eyes that had seen far more than she ever let on. Marcia worked the night shift as a janitor at Delridge, a sleek tech company in downtown Seattle, where ambition gleamed brighter than empathy and people often stepped over kindness in their rush to the top. To most employees, she was just the cleaning lady. A blur at the end of the hallway, a pair of rubber gloves glimpsed in the reflection of a glass door. No one remembered her name. Few greeted her aside from the occasional polite intern, and almost no one imagined she had a story worth knowing. But Marcia didn't complain. She quietly scrubbed away the footprints left by important meetings, picked up crumpled coffee cups abandoned after late-night brainstorms, and emptied trash cans filled with discarded ideas and half-eaten snacks. Sometimes she overheard chuckles behind her back. Someone once joked, "Careful, the janitor might hear our trade secrets," followed by laughter that said more about them than it did about her. One manager tossed a used paper towel onto a table and muttered, "Clean that up, will you?" Not as a request, but as a reflex, the kind of command given to someone you don't think of as fully human. Marcia simply smiled and kept moving, not because she agreed, but because she had learned long ago that silence could hold more power than protest, especially when you're invisible to those around you. What no one knew was that every step Marcia took wasn't just to tidy up the mess others left behind. She was listening. She was watching. She moved through those hallways like a shadow, with memory passing by the rooms where decisions were made, where numbers mattered more than names, and where no one realized that the quiet woman sweeping the floor remembered everything. Marcia had seen many faces come and go over the years, fresh graduates with wide eyes, middle managers chasing promotions, senior engineers burnt out from late nights. But through it all, one figure remained constant at the top: Daniel Knox, the company's sharp-suited CEO. Daniel was brilliant, no one could deny that. Under his leadership, Delridge had tripled its market value and earned headlines in tech magazines. But inside the walls of the company, his name didn't inspire admiration. It sparked tension. He led through fear. People lowered their voices when he walked by. Interns dreaded running into him. Department heads rehearsed their reports like soldiers preparing for inspection. And when Daniel was displeased, which was often, his words were sharp enough to cut. Marcia had witnessed it all: the harsh emails printed and left on desks like warnings, the public firings framed as performance restructuring, the quiet departures of those who had dared to speak up. Once she saw him tear a proposal in half in front of its creator, muttering, "This is a waste of my time, like most of you." To the rest of the world, Daniel was a visionary. Inside Delridge, he was a tyrant in a tailored suit. And it wasn't just the high-level employees who suffered. The cleaning crew, the cafeteria staff, the night security people, like Marcia, felt it too. Budget cuts always started with them. Overtime pay disappeared with no warning. Requests for better equipment or safer working conditions were ignored. Once, when Marcia's coworker slipped on a wet floor and injured her wrist, management called it a non-priority incident. Daniel barely looked at them, but when he did, his gaze held the same cold efficiency he used on spreadsheets: assess, discard, move on. Marcia never forgot his words one night as he passed by her in the lobby, not even glancing up. "People like you should be seen, not heard." She had nodded politely in response. But deep down, something shifted. That sentence, so casually cruel, planted a seed. Because what no one realized, not Daniel, not the managers, not the executives who walked past her without seeing her face, was that Marcia wasn't just a janitor. She was watching. She was remembering. And quietly, day after day, she was getting ready. No one at Delridge Systems ever wondered why Marcia stayed, why a woman of her age would spend over a decade wiping down whiteboards and vacuuming beneath desks in a place where no one even noticed when she was sick or missing. To them, she was just their constant, silent, forgettable. But the truth was, Marcia Lewis had a reason. Years ago, before Delridge became a billion-dollar company, it was a dream shared between two best friends, Daniel Knox and Jerome Lewis, Marcia's late husband. Jerome had been the quiet genius behind the system's architecture, while Daniel was the charismatic strategist who charmed investors. Together, they built the foundation of the company in Jerome and Marcia's modest basement. But when Jerome passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack, everything changed. In his will, Jerome left 30% of the company's shares to Marcia, a stake large enough to influence major decisions, even dismiss executives. At first, Daniel promised to protect her interests, speaking gently and offering legal jargon Marcia pretended not to understand. But over time, he stopped calling, stopped asking her opinion. Eventually, he stopped acknowledging her at all, and Marcia, grieving and alone, chose silence not out of weakness, but out of strategy. She came back to the company not as a shareholder, but as a janitor. People assumed she needed the money. In truth, Marcia had millions in assets. What she wanted wasn't a paycheck. She wanted to see for herself what her husband's legacy had become. She wanted to walk the halls where his ideas once lived, to understand how something they built with care had turned into a place driven by fear and greed. And what she saw broke her heart. The company had lost its soul. Ambition had replaced compassion. Loyalty was traded for profit, and Daniel, once her husband's closest friend, had turned into someone Jerome wouldn't have recognized. So she took notes. She observed. She remembered names, dates, and conversations. She quietly collected documents left on printers, read memos left open on screens, and watched the company unravel from the inside. And all the while, Marcia was waiting, not for revenge, not for glory, but for the right moment to take back what had been lost. And now, after all these years, she could feel it coming. The moment was near. It happened on a Thursday night, quiet, ordinary, forgettable to anyone else. But for Marcia, it was the night everything crystallized. She was cleaning the executive lounge on the 21st floor, the kind of place reserved for board members and high-ranking managers. Plush leather chairs, crystal water dispensers, and a view of the Seattle skyline that made the city look like it belonged to them. Marcia was wiping down a coffee table when she heard voices in the hallway. Two senior managers, unaware she was nearby, strolled in mid-conversation, laughing in that smug, careless way people laugh when they think no one beneath them is listening. "Did you hear Knox canned that warehouse lead today?" One chuckled. "Yeah, the guy had a kid in the hospital or something. But hey, numbers don't lie," the other replied. Then came the sentence that froze Marcia in place. "They're just background noise. Janitors, temp workers, maintenance trash you take out when you're done using." The laughter echoed for a second too long. They didn't see her. They didn't care who heard. And in that moment, Marcia felt something deep inside her snap, not in anger, but in clarity. That night, she went home, pulled out a worn leather box from the top of her closet, and laid it on her dining table. Inside were documents, shareholder certificates, early company memos signed by Jerome, personal letters from Daniel, full of promises long broken. She opened her laptop and began to write. Not a resignation, not a complaint, a plan. Marcia drafted a formal statement of Daniel's ethical violations, citing misuse of funds, abuse of power, and toxic leadership practices. She compiled detailed logs she had kept over the years, witness accounts, screenshots, audio clips, photos of unsafe working conditions, ignored HR reports. She reached out to an old friend, Linda Cortez, a corporate attorney who had known Jerome. Linda's response was swift and sharp. "You have more than enough, and the law is on your side." Marcia didn't sleep that night. She reviewed everything line by line. She rehearsed what she would say, not out of vengeance, but responsibility. She wasn't just cleaning anymore. She was preparing to reclaim the legacy her husband built, and to tear down the rot that had taken root in his name. By morning, the decision was final. The janitor was no longer in the background. She was walking straight into the boardroom. In the days that followed, Marcia moved through Delridge's halls with the same quiet grace she always had, but something had changed. Her shoulders were straighter, her eyes sharper. She still wore the same janitor's uniform, still emptied the trash and wiped down the conference tables. But inside, she was no longer cleaning up after them. She was getting ready to confront them. Each evening after her shift ended, she stayed up late at her kitchen table, going over every detail of her presentation. She created a slideshow, simple, clear, devastating. It didn't just include financial inconsistencies and HR violations. It included names, dates, voices. Marcia had receipts. She practiced her speech in the mirror, adjusting her tone until it struck the right balance between calm authority and moral conviction. She didn't want drama, she wanted truth. And more than anything, she wanted people to listen. Not because she was loud, not because she was powerful, but because she had earned the right to be heard. Meanwhile, she coordinated with Linda, the attorney who helped prepare the legal framework that would allow Marcia to call for an immediate shareholder vote. As the majority stakeholder, Marcia had every right to not only confront Daniel, but to remove him. She sent a quiet request to be added to the agenda of the upcoming shareholder meeting. No one questioned it. No one paid attention to the sender's name. It was just another item in a long list of updates. Typical oversight, typical arrogance. Marcia also made one final call to the head of facilities, a kind woman named Tanya who had worked her way up from cleaning staff just like Marcia once had. She asked her to gather every member of the night crew for a lunch meeting after the shareholder session. "Trust me," Marcia said gently, "by tomorrow this place is going to feel very different." And so on the night before the meeting, Marcia stood once again in the empty boardroom vacuum, humming in the background, glass table reflecting the lights above. But this time she didn't feel small. She looked around at the polished furniture, the leather chairs reserved for people who never learned her name, and whispered softly to herself, "Tomorrow I won't be the one cleaning this room." The morning of the shareholder meeting arrived like any other coffee brewing assistants, printing agendas, executives checking their ties and egos. No one suspected a thing. In the grand conference room on the 22nd floor, the air was crisp and self-assured. Daniel Knox, as always, made his entrance last. Impeccably dressed, flanked by board members and legal counsel, he offered his signature half-smile as he took his seat at the head of the table. What he didn't notice was the woman who entered quietly just moments after dressed, not in a uniform, but a deep navy blazer and crisp white shirt. Her ID badge no longer read facilities. It read M. Lewis, shareholder. Some glanced her way with polite confusion. Others did a double take. Daniel didn't look up at all. The meeting began with routine numbers, quarterly performance, expansion plans, budget approvals. It was all very standard until her chair cleared her throat and said, "Before we close, there is one more item on the agenda. Ms. Marcia Lewis has requested to speak." Daniel frowned, slowly looked up. "Marcia Lewis, that's the janitor." A quiet rustle moved through the room. Marcia stood calm and composed her presence, filling the space in a way that no one expected. "For years, I've walked these halls. I've cleaned up after your meetings. I've listened to your strategies, your jokes, your silence," she began. "But I wasn't just a janitor. I am the widow of Jerome Lewis, co-founder of this company, and I hold 30% of Delridge Systems." The room went still. The silence was deafening. Daniel opened his mouth, but Marcia didn't stop. "I've remained silent for a long time, too long. But silence is no longer strength. It's time we speak the truth." She clicked the remote. Slide after slide appeared on the screen. Misuse of company funds, unethical firings, harassment complaints swept under the rug, whistleblowers silenced, and worst of all, Daniel's own words captured on audio mocking employees he deemed disposable. The temperature in this room dropped. Daniel tried to interject. This is taken out of context. She doesn't understand how." Marcia turned to the board. "I am invoking my right as majority shareholder to call an immediate vote to remove Daniel Knox as CEO." No one laughed. No one spoke. One by one, hands went up. First the CFO, then two directors, then the chair, then all but one. Daniel sat motionless. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. By the end of the hour, the vote was finalized. Daniel Knox was officially removed from Delridge Systems. As he gathered his things in disbelief, he passed Marcia on the way out. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smirk. She simply said, "You told me people like me should be seen, not heard. Today, I was both." The day after Daniel Knox's removal, the air inside Delridge Systems felt different, lighter, quieter, as if the building itself had exhaled for the first time in years. Whispers traveled faster than emails. "Did you hear what happened yesterday?" The janitor was the owner. She fired the CEO in front of the board. But while gossip buzzed, Marcia wasn't interested in drama. She wasn't there to enjoy the moment. She was there to rebuild. That same afternoon, she returned not with gloves and a mop, but with a leather binder, a clear agenda, and a quiet determination. She met with department heads, legal, and HR, not to shake things up, but to clean them up properly this time. Her first acts as acting chairwoman were bold and long overdue. Wages for janitorial maintenance and cafeteria workers were increased to a livable standard. Overtime pay was reinstated with retroactive compensation. An anonymous ethics hotline was established and staffed by an external committee. Mandatory leadership training began focused on emotional intelligence, equity, and accountability. Toxic managers were evaluated, warned, or quietly shown the door. But Marcia didn't stop at policy. She held meetings, real ones, with people who had never been invited to speak before. She listened to their experiences, their frustrations, their ideas. A young receptionist confessed she had nearly quit because of the fear-driven culture. A middle-aged engineer admitted he hadn't smiled at work in over a year until now. Marcia responded the same way to everyone. We're not just rebuilding a business, we're rebuilding trust. And that starts with listening. In a symbolic move, she requested that the name of one of the company lounges be changed to the Jerome Room, a quiet space for reflection and conversation open to every employee at every level. She didn't demand that people remember what she had done. She asked them to remember why it had to be done. The foundation of Delridge Systems had been corrupted, but it hadn't crumbled. Thanks to one woman who had been overlooked for too long, the company now had a second chance to find its soul. And for the first time in years, people came to work not just to survive, but to belong. Weeks passed, the buzz settled, the headlines faded, but something far more important remained: respect. Marcia didn't take a private office. She didn't wear a nameplate or sit behind glass. Instead, she worked from a corner desk near the break room where people could find her, talk to her, thank her. And they did. The young intern who once nervously avoided eye contact now brought her coffee every Tuesday. The former janitorial team, now unionized and better paid, stopped by just to say hello. Even the coldest executives began to greet her with something new in their voice: humility. Then one afternoon during a company-wide town hall, something happened that stayed with everyone in the room. After Marcia finished her speech about transparency and inclusion, a junior engineer no older than 23 stood up, his voice shaking just a little. "I was ready to quit. I thought this place would never change. But then you showed up, and you didn't shout. You didn't threaten. You just showed us what quiet strength really looks like." He paused. "Thank you for seeing us." Marcia looked at him with a soft smile, eyes full of both pride and understanding. And then she said simply, "No, thank you for finally seeing me." There was silence, then applause, slow, then rising until the whole room was on their feet. She didn't ask for that moment. She didn't need it. But it mattered. Because after years of walking halls as if she were invisible, Marcia Lewis had become the most visible person in the building, not because of wealth or titles or power, but because she reminded everyone that dignity isn't something you're given by others. It's something you carry with you quietly until the world is ready to notice. That evening, as the sun set over the skyline, Marcia walked out of the building she had entered for over a decade. Only this time she didn't leave as a janitor. She walked out as the woman who swept silence aside and made space for voices to rise.